hello to my friends here who are on the screen. So we have with us Dawn Carter, who is the Global Director at Uber, and her experience includes Intuit, Amazon, NetApp, and she was the former president of the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Hey, Dawn.
Hello.
Dan Black was the global recruiting leader at EY and for a long time, actually. And he's also a former president of the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Hello, Dan. Thank you for
my pleasure,
being here.
Farouk. Hello.
Very good. And Christine Cruzvergara, who is the VP of Higher Ed and Higher Education and Student Success at Handshake, and previously at Wellesley, George Mason, and Georgetown University. Thanks for joining us, Christine. And I am Farouk Day, Vice Provost for Integrative Learning Life Design at Johns Hopkins University. You might be hearing of Johns Hopkins in the news a lot lately as we're tracking this coronavirus, the COVID-19 spread around the country, but we're also doing a lot of other work to try to mitigate this for our students and all of our stakeholders on campus. And one of the things that we're starting to really pay attention to, or we really started to think about from day one, is the impact of this global pandemic on student outcomes after graduation. We are getting close to graduation ceremonies all around the country, and all of these students are thinking about what they will do after they graduate. We're also thinking about our students who are headed or planning to go to internships this summer. This gave us the idea of having this web chat, and I couldn't have found better leaders to help guide us through this conversation, to get a sense of where we are in terms of jobs and internships, what are employer plans, how is the economy shaping. I have to start by saying that it is too early to tell in definite terms what will happen, but there are certainly some patterns and trends that are developing, and the four of us here on the screen are talking to a lot of people in our networks. Some of us are doing some surveys. We are paying attention to the trends that are out there, and we might be able to offer some guidance and some insights today. The recent poll that was conducted by the National Association of Colleges and Employers is very telling. We already know that about 24% of employers are planning to hold on to their recruiting plans as they are. What that means is that more than 3/4 of employers are planning to change or are already changing their plans. The story looks a little bit less grim when it relates to internships. We are now at about 84% of employers who are keeping their internship plans as they are, but they're talking about how to move them into remote roles and possibly project-based. Frankly, from my perspective, I think that that's a good idea because this coronavirus is not going to last forever, and companies are going to need to continue to feed their recruiting pipelines for the future. So if I had a company, the internships would be the last thing I would want to cut right now, because it would be cutting the investment for future talent. Wouldn't you agree, especially Dan and Don, that you're on the ground as employers? Am I right about that? Internships and trying to safeguard those, and what are you seeing?
I'll start, Dawn. So yeah,
Perfect.
First of all, you're 100% right, and I think that for many organizations that employ interns, and you're all familiar with this, a big reason to employ interns is certainly not just for the work that they'll do while they're interns. It's because you want to introduce them to your culture, to your organization, and give them a chance to see if this is something they'd like to do full time. A lot of companies have that as an end game, or as at least a goal, if not the goal of their internship. And so, similar to what you said, Farouk, at EY, we're maintaining all of our offers and all of our acceptances for all of our interns and our full-time staff, with the explicit purpose of saying, this is going to end at some point. We are going to need talent. We're going to need to be coming back, kind of bigger and bolder, on the other side of this. And so providing that opportunity is more critical than ever, if anything, not less. I think, some of the surveys that I've seen, just one more point I'll make is, some of the surveys that I've seen and the information I've been on multiple calls every week now with other people that do what I do, lead recruiting at large organizations. Some of the data that you get, similar to the data that you see on COVID-19, not all data is created equal. And so saying, are you changing your plans? Well, of course we're changing our plans. There are places around the world where I can't physically have people come and join us today because our offices are not open. So we're making other plans, but I think what you have to remember is a lot of those changes will entail, maybe there'll be some deferrals, maybe there'll be some changes in timing on how long either the internship or the experience is. And so digging underneath the surface and understanding what that means is important, but there's no question about it. I think investing in the future of the organization very much means still having interns coming and join you and new staff, because you're really planning for the future with that cohort anyway. Dawn?
Yeah, and I plus one to what Dan said, and I think the thing where you see some of the companies that are in the news around canceling interns, you have to think about the type of internship they were offering. It could be sales, it could be a type of internship that just cannot be done remotely. And so, plus one on making sure that, for Uber, this is a pipeline of talent for our future. And we were lucky that we were done with all of our new college grad hiring. And like EY, we're excited to have those folks join us. And I think Dan would agree to this. I mean, I think it's the when will they join us in person, is still something that each company is taking differently, and each university is even taking differently approach to. So I think, what I learned from a call I was on with Dan this week is that, yes, everyone is augmenting their intern program to best fit the needs of those organizations. And we're all doing it similar, but not the same, which I think makes it challenging for career center directors, right? That they're going to have to partner with us in very different ways. And so it's hard for us, where a university takes action one way. They're now having to work with all these companies that are taking action very differently based on the needs of their organization. So I think there's a balance of how we need to increase communication with our career centers and the groups that we work with and our partners, and figure out what that balance is. And I don't think we've figured that out quite yet, as we're just rolling kind of into this process globally.
That's interesting. Dan and Dawn, I had a quick question for you. As you all are trying to figure out what things could look like, both for internships as well as full-time hires, are there specific things that you're doing proactively with each of your recruiting teams, whether it's campus recruiting or other recruiting teams, to ensure that you're ready for kind of the long haul and to take care of everything that we're in the midst of?
Yeah. I think it's a smart question. There's a couple of things. Happily, many organizations had started thinking about, digital, video, those kinds of things, and either dipping their toe in the water, or in our case, fully immersed. All of our interviews, we interview almost all of our people via video, campus experience, at least for the initial. So preparing and having the right platforms to be able to manage what might be what will likely look like a different internship or a different start is something that we're certainly focused on, and that includes some other things that maybe as recruiters and people in higher ed haven't thought about. It's like, okay, now I have to think about bandwidth. Now, bandwidth is that's not my sweet spot. That's not my fastball.
No.
I can spell bandwidth.
Yes.
But hey, if I'm going to have, so for the last couple of weeks, we've had virtual onboarding for all of our experience hires, because our campus hires and interns haven't started yet. So making sure that we can handle that load. And by the way, we can't assume everyone has their computer. So how do we get computers to people that are starting, our laptops? Can people pick them up, or the logistics and supply chain of that? So it's really interesting the different types of things that you're thinking about. But those are the types of things that we're thinking about, is knowing it will be different, knowing there may be some more things move, a lot of things move to virtual, or timing is different. Do we have the wherewithal to support that in a way that makes it still a meaningful opportunity and experience? That's what I'm spending a lot of my time on, and my counterparts as well.
Yeah, and to add on this, we're lucky at Uber that our interns on board with our regular new hires. So the efforts that our company, like Dan's company, is making related to onboarding employees virtually is one set. And as Dan even said, I have a couple different teams that are working on different things. How do we take our engagement program virtual? What does that look like? Do we have the bandwidth, and not just people bandwidth, but do we have the ability, and what programs or what products we may need that we didn't think about? And so those are all things that I'm working on with my team. And just, as we continue to look at what we're hiring, how do we convert interns globally? For us at Uber, we have interns working for us year-round globally, depending on the countries. And so we have interns that are in very different spots. And so we're some of that stuff we're tackling as it comes up, and some of that we're ahead of the game, and some we're right in the middle. So it's just a constant Asana project board that we list tasks out and know what we're working on and know what we're prioritizing.
I think that sounds really good. At the same time, what we're hearing on college campuses is we're hearing employers pulling back in recruiting and in making offers. And I'm wondering what the general picture is overall out there. Are there sectors that are getting hit harder than others? Christine, are you getting a sense of what's happening nationally, even just from informal conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we look at all of our employers that are partners with Handshake and partners with all of our 900 plus universities, the reality is the sheer majority, a little over 50% are still evaluating. They're still trying to figure out what's happening with their organization. I think similar to what Dan and Dawn have already talked about, a lot of our employers want to be intentional about the decisions they make, and they don't want to be too brash about how they decide to react in the short term. Because they want to make sure that they're setting themselves, their teams, and their future hires up for success long term. And so a lot are actually still, they would say they're still evaluating. They're watching, they're paying attention to what's going on in the economy and with COVID, and then they're going to make decisions as it starts to roll out. And I think that's probably the hardest part for our university partners is they're trying to prepare students. The students have a ton of questions, but with 50% of employers still evaluating, there's a lot of unknown sort of in the air. And so I think, obviously there are certain industries that I think we've all seen in the news are certainly still growing. When you look at logistics, when you look at grocers, when you look at, healthcare, there's definitely still growth in many areas. I think the growth is just going to look a little bit different. We were all just talking right before our call, for those of us that have kids, they're home with us right now. We're also homeschooling in addition to working. And we really relied on a lot of online learning, right? For kids of pretty much every age. And so there's a huge growth in some of those areas. So I think it'll be really quite fascinating to see which industries are going to continue to grow, but adapt quite differently. And I actually, in my opinion, I think education is going to be one of them. I think K through 12 and higher education are going to be looking at some different new skill sets as we move forward past COVID-19.
Right. Yeah. I'm sorry, but
I was just going to say, I think you have to remember both Dan and I are from pretty large organizations, right? So I think when you start seeing that some companies have had to pull out of their internships, sometimes you have to look at the industry they're in. Sometimes you have to look at the size of their organization and the type of internship they were offering. So the hard thing is, compared to 2008, to that whole era of what was happening, it was a very few industries. This is coming across lots of different industries and will have impact to those organizations. One of the things I was on a call with this week around just what are talent acquisition leaders doing? The one thing I walked away with, and this group has been meeting twice now, the first was last week and the second was this week, was that I was like, oh my God, I do not want to be in the healthcare industry right now, like working as a talent acquisition leader, because they can't get enough nurses. They have lots of new regulations that they're dealing with. They don't know who can do those things. And so there's this talent shortage that you wouldn't think about. And Christine, you bring up really good thoughts around those industries. So I think, over the next couple months, we'll see some even different shifts that we're not even thinking about now. But I just think not all companies are created equal, and we have to understand that companies may have to have made some really hard choices around interns and intern programs. But the young lady from Google who lost her design internship, 4 days later, she has an internship again with another company. And so I think, you know, we just have to use our networks through LinkedIn and through other networking opportunities to get students exposure to those roles that still may be open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my advice to candidates now and to college students especially is to pay attention to how the economy is shifting. There is no question that we are experiencing a paradigm shift, similar but different than the one we experienced in 2008 and 2001. You know, so this is the economy was around that cycle point anyways, but this COVID-19 obviously is speeding it up. And we need to pay attention to the industries that might be thriving out of this, the industry sectors. So I agree absolutely with those. I would add remote work platforms are certainly in high demand now, and I would imagine would be hiring quite a bit. You know, companies like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Slack are being used a lot. For example, today for this webinar, GoToMeeting, you know, all of these companies, as we're moving into this virtual world, the companies that have been in this business for years now are experiencing higher demand than usual. And the question I think that is on every table is, or in every organization is, will it continue once COVID-19 passes? And it will not pass in weeks. You know, we're talking about months. You know, the specialists that I'm hearing, that I'm listening to here at Johns Hopkins, they're talking about several months down the road before this is over, possibly longer. So the question is, will we get used to this virtual world? Will we get used to working remotely? Will we get used to teaching our kids and our college students online? And will we ever come back to the way things were? And if not, these are businesses that are going to continue to thrive. The shipping industry is reported to be experiencing high demand right now. The food business, you know, grocery stores, everybody is possibly eating more now at home. So that business, I think I would also look into. And I recently read also an article that is predicting that government hiring will be on the rise in the future as government is going through a complete overhaul and restructuring to manage a global crisis. So as we look into this, I think we will see that pattern that government will need to hire more talent. And certainly there will be industry sectors that we're looking at that are currently struggling and will continue to struggle. And the question is, how will they adapt and reinvent themselves out of this tragedy? Tourism, travel industry obviously have been hit especially hard right now. And I would tell you that, you know, as we are seeing online education thrive, traditional education is experiencing and will continue to experience financial hardship in the future. Traditional, so that is public schools, that is private schools, that is universities and colleges. You know, this shutdown for several months is gonna have an impact on their own balance sheets. You know, that's a lot of students that they've had to back home and send back. That's a lot of lost revenue, and there will be an impact on there too. So I think the aftermath, we will be watching it for a long time.
Yeah.
But this is unlike 2008 because the economic fundamentals are certainly stronger this time. And we're not experiencing something that is affecting negatively every single industry sector out there. There are sectors that are doing really well right now and will continue to do well. And we have to watch those and adapt. Do you agree with this assessment? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree, Farouk. There's been some really great postings coming in through the chat and through the Q&A. I think a couple of things that I would address, and first and foremost is, look, there are going to be, to your exact point, industries that are taking this, getting a really hard hit. You know, hospitality certainly being one, travel being another, where it would be hard pressed, I would think, for an organization to say, hey, we have to either furlough or do something else with our own employees because the work is just not there. It's not tenable. And and then still say, but what we're going to honor people coming in, right? So I think that's going to be the reason behind some of the cancellations of internships or full-time. I do think, however, that even those organizations that are hardest hit are doing a couple things. First, they're maintaining that relationship and saying, look, this is what's happening to us today. We know that there'll be a rebound, and we'd love to continue that conversation.
Yep.
So I've heard of organizations doing that, across some of those harder hit industries. I've also heard of actually just yesterday I was on a call. I thought this was brilliant, of companies reaching across the aisle. So there's maybe a CVS pharmacy has tremendous needs right now, and they're extending actually specific invitations for people in hospitality, hotels, et cetera, to say, hey, we're looking for people. So if your organization is struggling to keep you on board now, we're looking for people in our organization. So I think what that translates to, Farouk, and just to tie into what you were saying, is for students now, yes, if either you were hoping to have an internship or a job, or it's either suspended or you're not quite sure what's happening, I think it's also a matter of taking the impetus upon yourself to go out and look for other opportunities that might be opening. And maybe it's not the dream internship or job that you had thought of at this point, but we're not in the dream or the dream situation that anyone would have thought of. So being flexible to see, I saw on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn feed every morning, there's a post up on the top. Maybe it's because I'm a recruiter, but I'm sure you could find this on LinkedIn and other sites. I'm sure Handshake has something to say about this as well, of industries that are hiring in big numbers right now. And so it is a matter of, I think, being flexible and proactive to the extent that you can.
Agree.
Yeah, I would just
Go ahead, Christine.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Don.
No, finish, Christine.
Okay. I was just going to say, I see some questions here too from Career Centers asking, how do you help set your students apart? What should the students do in this particular time period? And I would offer a few thoughts. First is remind students that they can't control everything, but they should control the things that are within their sphere of influence. During this time, while they're at home, while they're trying to adjust to this new routine that they now have to get accustomed to, while they're trying to do online learning, there are actually a number of really active things that they can do. So first is they can actually start engaging digitally, right? We're all doing remote work. We are all engaging with each other virtually, as we are right now in this very conversation. So that's not actually any different than what the employers are doing. I was taking a look at some of the data that we have within Handshake, and we had done an analysis of the past year to see how many employers had increased the number of messages that they were sending to students on our platform. And over the past year, this is pre-COVID, we saw 320% increase in employers messaging students, and we saw 65% of students were actively engaged in answering those responses with employers, right? That's pre-COVID. Can you imagine how much higher that's going to be when we look at that number just in the next 6 months or the next year, right? And so students should be getting on the platform. If you're using Handshake, they should get on the platform. They should be filling out their profile, but this is true for any online platform. They should make sure that their profiles actually explicitly display who they are, what they bring to the table, what their values are, their skills. These are all things that students can take active control of, and they can be sure that they're actually displaying and depicting who they are in a way that is attractive to employers, so that it makes it easier for an employer. To Dan's point earlier, they have very little bandwidth right now, and they're trying to figure out how to do this at scale. So for the students, make it easy for the employers to do that. I can't speak to other platforms, but I can say, at least within Handshake, a student who completes their profile and fills out the section for employers on geographic preferences, their job roles, their job interests, 80% more likely to be found by an employer and to be messaged. That's a huge increase, right? And so I can only imagine that those types of numbers are going to continue to grow. And then I think as employers, Dan and Don, you all happen to be partners with Handshake. You want people to actually respond and to show their interest. We're starting to build in new things that allow students to actually address, are you interested in this employer? Do you want to follow this employer? So that those can be stronger signals on the employer end, so that they can also better connect with talent, right? I think these are the types of things that students really have to pay attention to as they're thinking about it. And then I would say real quick, as one sort of like encapsulating thought, your digital brand, as we've sort of just talked about, is super important. Who are you? What do you represent? I think students also need to pay attention to their digital shadow. I refer to that as what other people say about you online. So when somebody Googles you, what else comes up that wasn't what you put on there, what other people put on there, and does it actually align? And then finally, digital engagement, and making sure that as a student, you're engaging responsibly and in a way that actually depicts who you are when you answer tweets, when you respond to LinkedIn comments. How you show up online, I think, also really matters. So those would be a few quick things that I would say to career services. Make sure you're really helping to educate students on that.
And you know what, I'm going to add on to that, because those, Christine, those are all like things I wrote down last night of like what they can help their students with. But I also think, as Dan mentioned, you know, at some point we will kind of come on the other side of the horizon of this and what we're dealing with, and roles will start coming back. So I think there's an opportunity for students, whether they're recent new college grad or soon to be new college grad or intern, to still connect with those recruiters and just, you know, keep those networks up and let those folks know, like, you know, this X company is still one of my top choices. You know, what's the best way for me to keep connected with you over the summer? Because I think, you know, pipelining for recruiters is going to be essential for us to think about not only ready now talent, you know, talent that we can hire right now, but also future ready talent. What does that freshman and sophomore or junior look like, and how do we start thinking about engaging with those folks between now and the fall, and what that may look like. So I think there's opportunities for what's happening with the students, but again, I agree with you, Christine, they own some of this, and they have great and amazing career centers that can help them with that.
Mm-hmm. Good. So I want to ask a question about our most vulnerable students and how this hits them especially. I think, Dan, I heard you comment about this a little bit earlier in terms of not assuming that everyone has a laptop and can do an internship remotely. So I'm thinking about our underrepresented minorities, our first generation, our limited income students, international students who many of them are quarantined in their dorm rooms or are potentially displaced right now and can't travel back to their home countries, and are wondering what's going to happen now, visa issues. What are you hearing on the ground of how this is impacting them, and what are employers doing, what are colleges doing, what can they do?
So from an employer standpoint, I will tell you, you know, I heard someone say a couple of days ago that this that COVID-19 doesn't discriminate. I don't know that I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think, you know, depending on your situation, you know, this situation can be extremely harder on you know, different groups of people. I think for us, what we've tried to do as an organization is take as much of a personalized approach as we can. And so to have a blanket statement, so we have purposely avoided sending out mass communications. I mean, we're of course communicating with people that are in process with us as either interns or full-time hires or experienced hires. So we are communicating, you know, to the masses, but as you all have probably seen in the last few days, you know, those mass messages from all of your banks and financial institutions and the groups you're a part of saying, you know, we're with you, we're dealing with this, you know, stay safe, you know, they don't provide you a lot of solace if there's something specific. I mean, our chat window here is case in point, if there's something specific that's on your mind. So what I've been recommending to my teams around the world, candidly, is, hey, we can go out and say, here's what we're trying to do, we're working through, we're thinking about virtual, we're thinking about different timing, those kinds of things. But what I'm asking all of my recruiters to do is to have individual outreach to the extent that they can, and as quickly as they can. And you know, frankly, with a slowdown in recruiting for most organizations, that's a little extra time. And boy, is that a good use of time to reach out to individuals to say, what's on your mind right now? Just yesterday in our Ireland office, we had a couple of candidates that were due to start with us, not a mid-level career, and they physically can't. Why? They can't obtain their visa because the Irish visa office is closed for 4 months. Like, you call, you don't even get a message. And so sending them, hey, we're working through this and trying, that doesn't help. But reaching out to them individually saying, listen, we're working out something with them. We'll say, you know, we physically can't bring you onto the office at this point or bring you onto the firm, but here's what we'll do. Here's when we'll reconnect. Here's the things that we can do to help you. That kind of personal attention is more necessary than ever. And it's not always the first thought. The first thought is big communication or talking head or those kinds of things. So I think you have to augment that, Farouk, to your exact point, to understand what it is. Because I'll tell you one thing right now, and one last example. I had a student that contacted me that I had visited at his university about a month ago before this all started. And he reached out and he said, do you have a few minutes to talk? I'm like, absolutely. Now give this kid credit. He's like, I know you're the global head of recruiting. You're probably not busy. I just want to have a half hour of your time. And he said, Dan, I feel like if the internship goes away, I'm okay with that as long as I know that when on the other end of this, when I graduate, I'll have a full-time job. And when I told him, I said, well, I can't guarantee what's going to happen 18 months from now. Our whole point of having interns is so that when you graduate, you come on full-time. And just hearing that that's the plan, and that was specific, his only question, he goes, I'm fine. I'm good. Thank you so much. I feel so much better. And those kinds of conversations have to start happening with more regularity.
Yeah, and I think on top of that is this challenge of universities that students went home to their home countries, and now we have visa offices closed, or organizations may not have actual entities in those countries. And so some of those, like you say, Dan, we have to work out individually with some of those students, whether they're an internship or a co-op, or a new hire, because we too have students that, J1 process is kind of shifted to the right a little bit. And so we're just really trying to augment that. And sometimes I think individually managing that is good, but I think sometimes you have to figure out what that balance is of those all-in conversations and the individual. But it is, I love this idea of having your recruiters be more one-on-one with the candidates that they own between now and then. I think it's a great thing for us to think about as recruiters on the side.
Are any of you hearing of companies and organizations pulling offers, withdrawing offers that they have previously made, either for internships or for jobs to college students? I mean,
yeah, I've heard tell of that.
Yeah.
Admittedly, and Dawn, you mentioned this earlier, a lot of the organizations that I've been interacting with this week, especially, are ones that are similar-ish to ours, and that they're large, they hire lots of people, they understand the far-reaching impact of what pulling back an offer will do. So yeah, but of course you're hearing about that. I think small organizations and some of those disproportionately affected industries, I've heard some of that. But similar to Farouk, you made a great point earlier in comparing and contrasting this to 2008. I think the conversations you're having, I had a really interesting conversation with one of our business leaders in Europe. So I have a global role, and I said, look, our across the board stance is, we don't want to rescind or take back any offers. We don't want to, we're going to do the best we can to protect those. But there are going to be situations where that's going to be necessary, whether it's because of regulatory, like in some parts of the Middle East. If you defer, that's more of a legal risk to you and the candidate than to rescind and then go back and talk about new dates in the future. Mm-hmm. So there are some nuances. But what she said, which I thought was interesting, is if you're an organization that says, hey, I'm going to honor your offer, and then have you come in, and then in 3 months' time, you have to lay off your entire workforce, including those people you just brought on. Are you doing that person a favor by honoring the offer only to have them laid off in another 2 or 3 months' time? And I hadn't thought about, this is one of our consultants, talking with a lot of our clients, thinking about what's best for the individuals. I know sometimes it can feel hard because we're all in this great time of stress, but I think it goes back to the individual conversations. I am hearing about it, Farouk, but so far I haven't heard about that in large quantities. That's just not been my experience so far.
Yeah, and I was looking at the chat, and I think you'll see hard hit industries like the travel industry starting to react. I think I saw Southwest just pulled all of their internships. And again, folks, they're not flying planes, right? They're not. My nephew is a flight attendant, and I'm like, are you flying yet? Or are you looking for a job at Rayleigh's in grocery, right? And so, because I'm like, I was very nice. I'm like, I know you're living at home with your mom and dad, but they don't want you living at home forever. And so I think, but some of that is industry related. And for a company like Southwest Airlines to make that decision, I can't imagine what they had to think about. And it goes back to what you just said, Dan, it's a balance of their employees that are currently there and a balance of the work that they would have or could have those interns do. And I think we will need just as we go through this, think about those things.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, and I'm reading through the comments.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm looking this way, but I'm a visual dyslexic, and I cannot do too many things at one time.
There are just so many of them, and
I'm like, holy cow!
We're really
Someone said,
grateful.
"Could we do this for weekly?" I'm like, I don't know.
No, this is. I'm so grateful,
people.
and obviously, I'm grateful to the three of you, but also to the many who have joined us. You know, we had more than 2,000 people sign up for this session, so I'm really appreciative. And I was able to go to catch our good friend Manny Contaminolis from Northeastern, who shared that Marriott, for example, which would not surprise anyone, has experienced a 95% drop in their business and have canceled all internships and all jobs. That shouldn't surprise everybody, anyone.
No.
But those reports we are hearing, just as Don said, like just pay attention to the most affected ones. Christine from Handshake, are you hearing of these things yet? I know you're running a survey, and the results will come in a few weeks, so we'll know more.
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, I would actually say what we're hearing is very similar to kind of what Dan and Don just said. Not a whole bunch, other than, you know, obviously anecdotally through some of our universities, mostly through their students and sort of what they're already hearing firsthand from employers, but not necessarily anything directly to us. I do think as the weeks go on, we'll be able to see and actually track the changes in the development around some of those areas. Farouk, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Oh, we get to ask Farouk a question.
Let's ask Farouk a question.
Okay, I love that.
I'm obviously, from my perspective, I'm equally as interested on the university developments and changes as I am on what the employers are doing. And I'm curious from your perspective and in the conversations you've had at Hopkins, and feel free to speak to other universities too if you want, but how do you, right now for your institution, how do you see the impact of COVID on your enrollment for fall of 2020? How is that impacting international students, low-income students, students that are on Pell Grants? And do you see that drastically shifting the type of student population that will be present at Hopkins? Because that also impacts employers and how they think about their applicant pool and where they go. And do you think that what you're seeing at Hopkins will be reflected across all other types of institutions, or maybe just elite private institutions? Or what are your thoughts on all that?
Great question. You know, just as we are adapting in our world to the virtual tools that we're using for virtual recruiting, virtual interviewing, admissions are doing the same. And we are currently in the season when lots of students who have received admission and are making decisions about what colleges to attend. This is the time when they normally would go and visit those campuses, and the college campuses are trying to woo them to get them to commit to saying yes to that institution. All of that is happening virtual right now. So imagine doing a tour of the campus virtually. Imagine you're having these Zoom sessions with people who are telling you about the university and showing you videos and pictures, and if the weather isn't great there, they'll show you great pictures with blue skies fall foliage, etc. So all of that is happening. This similar to the recruiting world. It is too early to tell the impact, but as of now, it is not changing the foot traffic, if you will. It's not changing the in terms of the numbers of people who are logging in, who are turning in documents, etc. So I think we're looking at similar patterns. And I think also in terms of attracting students of underrepresented backgrounds, especially first gen and limited income students. That's always dependent mostly on, if not always, on philanthropy. And that will depend on the level of that philanthropy in higher education. If donors continue to support those initiatives, and I believe they will, then we will continue to be able to recruit and to attract more of our underprivileged students to increase and improve access to higher education. So I think the question that remains is how students make decisions about what colleges to attend. You know, because in one of the surveys that were run by, I'll have to go back and look at it, but I remember seeing it, is that one of the top indicators of what college you will pick, well, one of the factors that will impact your decision of what college you will pick is your visit to campus, your actual physical visit. So now that you're doing all of this virtually, how will that impact? Which university will you use? Will you rely more on rankings or on recommendations of alumni, et cetera? And then that obviously will change will have an impact on the type of students we will have in the future. A bigger question that I think is looming is online education versus residential, the traditional residential college. Higher education has never had a moment where it tested that hypothesis of online versus residential for an extended period of time, all at once, all universities. So this is a really interesting moment for higher education, because there's always been this, well, not always, but for the last 10, 20 years, we've always had this push and pull around, should we go all virtual? It costs too much. Is brick and mortar dead? Do we want to have the traditional just classroom, or is the future in online? And we've been essentially up until now playing around it with MOOCs and with platforms like Coursera, et cetera. It's always been on the periphery, and now we're in it 100%. I mean, my university is now a virtual university. We're teaching all online. We're offering all of our services, from admissions to career. We're connecting with alumni all in a virtual world. So it's no longer peripheral, it's all our core business now for an extended period of time. It is uncomfortable the first couple of weeks, and then we get used to it, and then we get used to it. And then when COVID-19 moves, we will be at a moment where we will truly realize, is this, do we miss what we had too much and we want to go back to it? Or this actually works and possibly it's more effective, efficient, you know, it saves us money, and maybe this is the direction we go. And if that happens, that is an entirely different paradigm. I mean, we have never had a moment where higher education has been disrupted to this level.
So much.
And for a long time, I mean, I know I've said it for a long time, and I know many of us have too, is that higher education is this giant industry of tradition. And it does not change as rapidly as industry, as you all do. And we've always said that, like, what it needs is a major disruption, that really sort of like a big disruption that will make it move to the next paradigm. And as difficult and tragic this COVID-19 situation is, this is the disruption moment for higher education, where we will potentially come out of it with new models of learning, of connecting, of enrolling, of doing our philanthropy and our advancement, of connecting with our alumni. The word alum could change, and its definition could change. And the value of the degree might be impacted, the cost of education. So all of those theories that have been written about in articles and books and talked about in speeches, we now have that opportunity to put it to the test and just see what would it work and perhaps it wouldn't.
Farouk, I have a follow-up question, because I've seen it on the chat a little bit around first destination surveys, and how are at Johns Hopkins, are you guys kind of wrapping your hands around that, and will that look different this year? I mean, because everyone's scattered, or is it somewhat similar surveys? But I've seen quite a few questions on chat, so I thought since we're all about asking Farouk right now, I thought I'd ask you what you guys are doing.
So first destination surveys are surveys that colleges run in order to assess where students are going after they graduate, and we usually run them for up to 6 months to find out whether they want to get jobs or went to graduate school, etc. They usually run through spring semester and all the way to graduation, and then we keep following up and gathering data all the way to 6 months out. And almost pretty much every college and university does that. We at Johns Hopkins have elected not to send the survey right now because we made the decision that our students need to hear from us about how we can help them, not what are they doing. It's a different question. So if I'm sending an email to our students, I need to ask them, how can we help you? How are you doing? How is this hitting you? So we've made that decision, proactive decision, that for the next at least month or so, our communication is all about addressing their needs rather than gathering information. So we've decided to delay this to later, potentially to May. And depending on how long this goes, possibly later, but for now we've moved it up to May. I think other campuses are thinking about doing the same or doing the same. So that's how we're collecting. I can tell you from a projections perspective and just looking at historically how college graduates behave in good economic times and in tough economic times, that you typically two trend lines. You have a trend line of students going to jobs, and you have a trend line of students going to graduate schools, graduate and professional schools. When the economy is good, the trend lines go like this. You know, they separate from one another, meaning that more students go to jobs and less students go to graduate schools, therefore impacting graduate school enrollment, revenues, etc. When during tough economic times, or I would say even scary economic times, you know, like this one might be in the scary section. We still haven't assessed fully if it's really a difficult economic time, but it is certainly a scary one. What you will see is a spike, or is an increase in students going to electing graduate and professional school, essentially saying, I'm going to park myself at school for a year or two until this passes, and I'll come back to work, which means it's less talent for you to choose from. And graduate school typically, like that, because that's more candidates and that's more applications for them. So it's more people going to graduate school, less people choosing to apply for jobs at the moment. And I think we've seen this after 2008. We've seen this in the early 2000s, and every economic downturn, typically those lines end up crossing. Or getting at least close to one another, and then they come back. So I think, within the next year, possibly more, you on the industry side, you will probably experience less talent pools because more of them are going to graduate school.
Right. And it's a global, we've already seen in this country, the number of Indian and Chinese students coming in has decreased year over year for the past 3 years. I think we'll probably see a little bit of a spike again this year based on that. Two things I just saw, Manny mentioned that NACED will be hosting a first destination seminar over the next couple of weeks, so please check the website. And Matthew from the NACE office, thank you, Matthew, said that the 2019 class of first destination surveys has been extended for submission to July, end of July 2020.
Yeah.
Year. So,
and excuse me, I just want to add one thing, is that something that universities are trying to figure out now is grading. Because grading, how to set grades during this weird time. In some classes, it might be, a straight line to a grade, but others, it's more difficult to grade through an online learning experience or home-based, a project-based experience. And whether, because it's tough, do you want to just give pass-fail to all students, or do you want to just assume an A or an A- to everyone and then just call it a semester? A lot of universities are having these conversations because obviously it impacts not just employment. You probably you may look at grades, maybe not. Graduate schools do look at grades, and a lot of students are anxious about what that means. So that's a lot of universities are trying to figure out how to handle this.
Add on to that real quick. I think one of the things that we had been seeing was already a trend with a lot of employers trying to move away from just GPA or majors as they think about who their students are and who their candidates are. And so one of the things that, for those of you, again, that happen to be Handshake partners, you'll actually see a message come out from us later today or tomorrow that will actually indicate we've opened up coursework on a student's profile as another mechanism for employers to actually be able to search beyond GPA and major. And I think more importantly, what this specific example that I'm sharing shows, Farouk, to your point about institutions, is a lot of these trends were already happening, right? We were already starting to dabble in technology. We were already starting to move remote in some ways. We were already starting to do different types of integration. And employers were already starting to look at skills over major, right? That's actually something Manny's been talking about for years, right? We've already been moving in that direction. I think what COVID-19 has done is simply accelerate the change that was already inevitable. And it might have taken something that would have been 18 months or 5 years of adaptation on the higher ed side, and it's just sped it up into a matter of weeks. And I think it's utterly fascinating. I mean, for someone who, I have worked the majority of my career over a decade in higher education, it is fascinating to me to see how quickly universities actually can adapt to change when forced to do it, right? And I think, like, Farouk, I was actually rereading, some of my team members had been reading our most recent article on 5 future directions recently. And they were asking me if they thought, you know, we needed to write essentially a new update to it already. And I was taking a read through it last night, and I actually, every single thing that we wrote is still 100% true. And we had anticipated when we wrote it last fall that there would be some kind of economic catalyst that would happen in 2020. We just had no idea it was going to be COVID-19 specifically, right? But the reality is those 5 directions that we talk about with integration, with technology, with, you know, focusing on those aspects, none of that is different. It actually is more true now than it was when we wrote it just 4 months ago. And so I think it's quite interesting to see how things have simply just accelerated what was already moving in that direction.
And we got even a little bit of pushback online, and we would, you know, every time you write something, you expect pushback. Otherwise, you haven't really written anything. So you need to have that. We got some pushback from folks who are saying, you know, like our recommendations to move to technology, to scalable approaches, to this virtual world we'd replace the essence of the one-on-one meaningful conversation. And we got that especially from the traditional counselor professional who really cares about that one-on-one. And here we are, you know, like, so now what do you do when you're not able to do that? Like so now we are in a situation where for months you cannot sit in a room and have a one-on-one counseling session and have your, you know, your appointments. A lot of campuses are transitioning to virtual appointments, but now with virtual and with the high need that we have, are you able to offer them to every single person who logs on? Because it's really easy now for students to just, within 2 clicks, they can get to you. So, you know, at Hopkins, we're offering a lot of, what we're doing is virtual office hours. Kind of like this, you know, a couple of people log on and then as many people show up as possible and try to do that. In this session right now, we have over 2,000 people who are logged in and who are engaging with us, and we're trying to keep up with all of the comments, and hopefully we'll be able to scale this conversation a little bit more. How is that shifting in the industry side? Like, are you seeing the same pattern?
I was just going to be like, and I was just thinking around something we talked about earlier, which is like, what can career centers do to help us employers? And I think about a couple things. You all are operating in very different spaces, and just like each company is different, you guys in your offices are working either remotely or not working remotely. But I think having somewhere on your college website that a recruiter can easily, in 1 click, without searching the word career center, in 1 click, know where to find what's going on within your career center, I think would be super helpful. I know it's something easy, but I think about all the work that our campus-facing recruiters, our full-cycle recruiters are going to be doing over the next weeks to even start shifting how we think about the fall. I think being able to find out what their core school information is, because every school, like every company, has different takes on what they're doing. I just think, you know, that 1-click way to find information on your college websites would be super useful on the employer side.
Yeah, I would say the other thing is you know, In the interest of trying to stay as positive and find silver linings, there have been parts of my business and lots of counterparts I've been talking to that have been trying to move portions of our business, whether that's client serving, HR support, recruiting, more virtual, so that, and again, with the sole purpose of opening up more time, back to your article, guys, on spending more of that in-person time and the dedicated time where it's most needed, as opposed to, kind of peanut buttering that across the entire kind of landscape or spectrum of the work that we need to do. So I've certainly been seeing that, some acceleration of some of the, the technology. But, as we come out the other side, and we will come out the other side of this, I think you will see, I could certainly speak for my organization, but I think you will see a lot more organizations putting that time and effort and resource into saying, okay, if and when there needs to be a touch point, a hand holding, a one-on-one, a face-to-face, let's make sure that that's at the right juncture. That's the right intervention at the right time. As opposed to, I think a lot of companies have fallen into is like, there's the old school group that says, oh, I got to always touch someone's hand or shake someone's hand. And then there's, oh, well, no, let's keep it all digital. Finding where on the spectrum to have those interactions and at what point it's the most meaningful for the individual, that's I think is going to be a really powerful outcome out of this. I wish we didn't have to go through this to see how that can have a powerful impact on not only candidates, but employees, on customers, on clients. But I'm seeing that play out actually around the world at EY, where we're saying, oh wow, I can leave this to virtual, and then I'm having my one-on-one time, even if it is via video right now, on the things that actually really matter at that specific juncture in that employee's life.
I couldn't agree more, Dan. I'm like nodding emphatically over here. I think that's right. I think it's the balance of figuring out what can be scaled, what should be scaled, and what should actually remain personalized, right? And I think that's, quite frankly, I think that's what we've all personally been trying to figure out with technology for the past 20 years. And I think it continues to be a balance and a learning opportunity as we go through, unfortunately, this difficult time. But yeah, I really agree with that.
Very good. So just I'm trying to summarize some of the themes that we talked about for the last hour so that we can focus maybe some of the strategies moving forward of how we can all shift our work, but also what candidates can do. Overall, what we know is that this is not a total economic meltdown where every industry is drowning. Some are struggling, and then others are thriving all of a sudden. And this is a time of a paradigm shift rather than an economic meltdown overall. So we know that for once. Two is that potentially a lot of internships and possibly jobs that are coming up for our college students may not look the way they had imagined them when they were interviewing. They might turn into virtual assignments for a while, maybe for good. They might turn into project-based for a while, maybe for good. So thinking about how to adjust to those things. And then three, how college students and just candidates in general can or should adjust their own expectations, but also their own strategies in this new world. I mean, everything has just shifted overnight, and they can't operate with the same manual, the same strategy that they operated with in the past. So what does this strategy look like moving forward? So this makes me think of just what we have been working on with such great focus and very intentionally for the last couple of years here at Johns Hopkins, is that the idea is that one, that people shouldn't waste their time planning their careers, because I have yet to meet a lot of people who are doing what they had planned on back then. Certainly, probably not the three of you had planned on being in these things, but rather pave the path forward through two things. We try to focus on two really major pillars. There are a lot of other things that can happen, but the two are immersive experiences. That the more experiences you have, the more immersive experiences you have, the more you'll get to know who you are and connect with the world around you and develop skills. And then over time, those experiences are going to bring you opportunities. So embrace the uncertainty, not knowing where this will take you, but just just do something, essentially, just have some experiences. And then the second one is to connect, and we focused it even more to have mentors, to have people, to have like your own advisory board, your own mentoring board, or just the relationships that can propel you forward, that can open the doors for you, that can tell you the inside scoop of what's happening, and that can guide you through tough times like this one, but also through the good times. How do we do that better is now the question that I'm trying to deal with. Like, if you are quarantined at home for a couple of months, how do you gain experience that way? But how do you have your own immersive experience that way? And then two, how do you establish these mentoring relationships? And then three, what is the strategy that our candidates and college students should use moving forward in order to navigate these strange times? What are you telling students?
Sorry, I'm writing some notes, otherwise I
Okay.
You know, I would say, Farouk, there's a few different things that can be helpful. You know, having an experience, I think there's, I think you'd agree that there's a traditional mindset, even among students, that an experience like, oh, the internship or this rotation with that company and what it's supposed to look like. But having that experience increasingly means a whole host of different things. I had an aha moment yesterday. All of my friends are sending me stuff to do to keep my children busy. And they're teenagers, by the way, still looking to keep them busy. And it's a whole, like, take a virtual tour of a museum, explore the Galapagos on Google Maps, those kinds of things. So I think my advice has been, how can you provide for yourself, and how can employers provide experiences that just sound and look very different than what is you traditionally think of would be an experience. So right now, I'll just give you a live example. We're thinking, boy, we were going to have this big live event where we were going to expose people to some of the firm leaders, and this was going to happen in another month or two. Expose people to firm leaders and hear about our culture, and then build in some learning. And boy, just the power of being live, that's an experience, but you can also make that a virtual experience. Right. You can also build in components and I'm not just saying, oh, have a webinar and have somebody, be in front of a camera. That's a piece of it. But then how do you connect people after that? How do you say, okay, now the 5 of you, we're going to randomly select 5 of you to go off and interact with each other and then come back and deliver? That's an experience that someone hasn't had, right? Or, how are we going to be able to now, as a global recruiting leader, my eyes are lighting up because now I can connect people in other parts of the world in ways that I couldn't in the past because they were too busy doing their individual on-site stuff. Yeah. This is a way to expose them to other parts of my organization. And so I think step one is stepping back from how all of us think about what an experience can or should look like, and getting really creative. So my 3 things I've been telling people is get personal. I mentioned that earlier, talk to the individual. Second thing is get creative. I don't think, that now is the time to put ideas out there. Starting next week, I'm going to be opening up to my recruiting team office hours pretty much every single day. If you have an idea on what we can do, let's get creative. And then, get on top of what you can control. Is the third thing. So I think a lot of people worry, like, how can I squeeze what exists, either a classroom setting, an internship setting? How can I make that work in a virtual environment? It's like, no. What you can control is the people that you have working for your organization, the passion that they feel for internships or their alma mater or what have you. That's what you can leverage. And the fact that you can't bring someone physically to a location because it's closed down or there's restrictions, et cetera, doesn't change the fact that you have these wonderful resources you can still bring to bear. So I think the mindset has to start to change a little bit.
Yeah, and I think to even top that, I love, Dan, your comment around thinking global. Like, for the university team at Uber, we were a decentralized function 6 months ago. And then we were lucky when I joined that we could centralize the team. And what we're learning through having a SWAT team to talk about our intern program is there are things that we do locally that we can now do globally with a far different reach and conversation. And so I'm excited about the work that they're going to do and excited about what may come about that and how that will change engagement with interns, or even our new college grads. So I think I love your, get personal. I try and do that with my team myself. We kind of use a thumbs up, thumb sideways, thumbs down. And that just helps me know where I can spend my time with that person or that team. And I love your idea about office hours. I'm going to probably steal that. Because hence I have a global team, so sometimes I could stay up too late and I'm not setting the right tone for my own team. So I think some of that is how do we even balance our own management style and how we are as an organization.
And Farouk, I'll chime in to kind of answer your question too about immersive experiences, as well as mentorship, and I'll take a stab at actually answering some of the questions that I keep seeing coming up on chat. So first and foremost, those of you that are asking about the mentorship module on Handshake, I want to be really transparent, really honest with you. That was never actually built super well in terms of being like a formal mentorship sort of connection platform. So yes, we have actually had discussions about sunsetting that particular feature by this summer, because instead, what we've discovered through talking with alumni and with students is that they would actually prefer a more organic form of networking and a more organic form of mentorship where they can connect if they happen to actually really hit it off once they actually have that conversation or that informational interview. I notice Dan is nodding because I'm sure he gets hit up all the time for people that want to have conversations. And sometimes you just connect and it works and sometimes you don't. So what we're going to do, we didn't want to sunset it right away. What we wanted to do was last summer, we launched peer messaging, which actually allows students to be able to find alums and students organically based off of either the reviews that they've written, based off of their profiles, based off of how they have answered some of the Q&A. And so through that, let's say I'll just use Dan as an example since he's nodding at me. If he had written something I found really interesting, I can peer message him. I can develop a relationship. We can have a conversation or a Zoom chat, whatever the case may be. If that happens to go really well, we continue to have a relationship and we continue to build it. Maybe we had that conversation, we didn't hit it off, and that's okay. I still learned something from that conversation, but no harm done, no foul. It's not super awkward. We don't have to be super connected at the hip in that way. So that's sort of the thinking behind there. And I think what that's actually allowed us to do, because we've seen a huge increase in students peer messaging each other and peer messaging alumni. I used to work at a women's college, and it's still natural. When they connect, one of the things that we're seeing is that, at least on Handshake's platform, there's over a 51% read and response rate. So students are actually more likely to get a response from their peer or from an alum. And some schools were wondering, are they mostly just interviewing or reaching out to people within their own institution, or are they actually going across the Handshake network? And 40% of students are actually choosing to contact people across the Handshake network. And they actually get a faster response from people not at their institution than at their institution, which was also kind of fascinating because I wouldn't have guessed that. I actually would have guessed it would be the other way around. So that's actually kind of fascinating. And then I think, Farouk, this leads me to your first question about immersive experiences. I think to Dan's point, you can use those connections once you actually have the informational interview to get creative about ways in which you can learn. So for example, we're currently onboarding some new folks on my team. And one of the ways in which we want them to be able to actually experience learning from each other is to log in on some of these virtual calls that we're having with our clients and partners, and to be able to listen and experience, hear the conversation, hear the banter, hear the questions. There are ways that's a really simplified way to essentially do a job shadow, right? Is to be able to like be on the call with a client at the same time. And employers across the country in a number of different industries can easily do that. So I think it's a matter of us just thinking differently about the ways in which we can engage folks in those experiences. I also think there's a number of online learning, whether it's MOOCs, whether it's Udacity, Coursera, many of the things that you already mentioned, that can also provide students with a lot of really wonderful ways to beef up their skills as they're trying to use this time productively too. So I think there's a lot of creative ways that we can.
And I think my biggest concern when we talk about immersive experiences and mentoring, and knowing that and having looked at it, even the 3 empirical data that those are the 2 big factors in career success and in life success, is that if you've had the opportunity and the privilege to have gained some powerful immersive experiences And if you have connections around you, you're connected to the right people, then you're able to succeed with your next steps. We recognize, and certainly we do here at Johns Hopkins, that that's not afforded to everybody. So it comes back to us as an institution to make sure that every single student has access to immersive experiences and to mentoring relationships. So so let me focus on mentoring for a second and say, this is a really good time to put that hypothesis, that theory of access to mentoring to the test. You have 2 or 3 months, well, maybe longer during this COVID-19. We know that it's a crisis. We know that we need to help our students. What if we just made it that a goal of ours that every single one of our students will have a mentoring connection through your own alumni network, but possibly a larger community of employers, faculty, etc. People, and the good mentors are the ones who not only are able to give good advice, but also who have strong networks of their own. Because that's when you really start to break the privilege line, and to give more equity to those to students with less privilege. And if you made it your goal, I prefer doing that than having a goal of trying to sit with every single student, which would be hard to do, and work through their career plans. I would rather make sure that I achieve equity by ensuring that every one of my students are connected to mentors. So I know we're leaning heavily on that strategy during this tough time. Fortunately, that's been our strategy for the last 2 years, is building that network for us. And there are strong platforms that are partnering with universities all around the country. Platforms like People Grove, Mentor Collective. There are others that many of you can share through the chat box that can complement the work that Handshake and other platforms do to extend that network. At the end of the day, it's not sitting with students and trying to get them to work on their plans. It's to make sure that you give them access to the networks and to the connections and to mentors and to immersive experiences at scale, so that no one falls through. And usually when you don't think of scale, and when you don't think of 100%, which was a big theme of the article that Christine and I wrote, 5 Future Directions in College Services, is that you really need to put in your mind that unless you hit 100%, then you're really not achieving equity. You're not really achieving inclusion. You're just waiting for the students who naturally would come to you, sign up for your office hours or for your virtual appointments, who are told by their parents to do so. And the ones who are more likely to fall through the cracks are the ones who are first to go to college in their families, of lower income, and are having to figure out how to maybe work a second or third job now that their Lyft and Uber shift has dropped as a result of COVID-19 or DoorDash, etc. Those are students who are not gonna probably realize how to connect with you through your virtual office hours. So how do you it is more impactful, in my opinion, that you connect them with what really works. And we have studied this, and we know that it is the power of mentoring and it is the power of immersive experiences. We can't lose sight of that during this crisis, because that will create even a bigger gap between the privileged and the non-privileged. The privileged ones are sitting at home, no shame to that, to those, and are relying already on their networks, on their families, on their parents to try to weather the storm. And others are not, and we have to build our strategies from the employer side and from the university side to ensure that everyone comes out of this crisis with similar outcomes. What say you?
Well said, Farouk. Well said.
All right.
Thank you. Yes.
So let me, as we try to wrap this up, I want to try to put us in predictive mode. So I want you all to turn into psychics potentially. Have your own crystal ball and tell us what will the world. Then, I don't know if you realize, but if somebody screenshotted that, that's going to be a meme.
I know. I was like,
what will the world look like in the future, as in a post-COVID-19 world? What would it look like? So I want to give you a couple of items to frame our predictions. What will enrollment look like in colleges, you know, and just higher education? What would it look like? What would the economy look like? What would be hot? What will not be? What would work look like, you know, for us and for everybody who's looking at jobs? Learning, recruiting. How do you think recruiting would look like in the future? Career centers on college campuses. And I think, you know, we should talk about also the college experience. Will we go back to a residential college, or is this the beginning of the end for that model?
Oh, I'll start on a few. I'm gonna assume in my crystal ball that the San Francisco Giants win the World Series. Sorry, Dan. That's gonna be my prediction. That we will get baseball back, and I will get NASCAR back, because right now I'm kind of tired of watching old baseball games and old NASCAR races. But I think my prediction is enrollment will be flat or down, and my prediction potentially is and it's just where I think things are going. I think for recruiting, I think this gives recruiters and recruiting organizations the opportunity to experiment in ways that we've never thought or we didn't think universities would be okay with. So I think this will open the door on both sides, for both the Career Center side and the university recruiting side, to experiment the heck out of our processes and just try and do and be creative and new things. And then I hope for my team is that at the end of this, we're just a stronger team. And I am so privileged to have such an amazing Uber recruiting team. I adore them all. And I hope that through all of this, they come back out on the back end, continuing to be this great global team that has only grown and been more collaborative globally.
That's tough to be. I would say a lot of those same things where you know, we're going to see some acceleration of some of the changes that, candidly, you know, Farouk, that you and Christina have articulated so beautifully on so many occasions. Some of the things, you know, of being able to get more personal, of moving the needle on what, you know, the future of work looks like, the future of university looks like. I don't think there's very many people that are on this chat, not from the questions I've seen you ask, that wouldn't have said, yeah, you know, we need to make some changes to accommodate, you know, a wider swath of students, a wider swath of employees. And I think that because of, you know, by necessity, companies, universities, et cetera, have made some of those changes. And look, the most obvious one is, you know, moving to virtual because of social distancing. But I think there's lots of other good questions being asked. I know there are, certainly in my organization, and for those on the panel, so I'm happy to speak for you, which is when you can't do things the same way. Because there's always been the option for lots and lots of people to, well, I can fall back into what I've done, and I can excuse it by saying it's always been successful, or I think it works despite what other data might suggest. When you physically can't do things the same way, it really does open up the minds of some people, in my view, to think about things a different way. So I've seen some leeway among some people in my organization, people I'm interacting with outside of my organization, some university I'm talking to, saying, boy, at least asking the question, doesn't this mean that, isn't this the reason that we were hoping for, or that we were looking for, again, not under these circumstances would we ever wish it, to start making some real change in people's lives. And I think there's, you know, let me take off my recruiter hat for a minute. I think there's a very personal side to this. There is not a single person I've talked to in the last week or so that can't wait to get out and see and be around people and have meaningful conversations in person with people again. And I think that desire, you know, along with some of the really great things we see, for all the bad behavior we've seen, we see a lot of great behavior, you know, athletes paying salaries for entire stadiums worth of people while stadiums are closed. I think the human condition has been on display here, and I think there's a lot of good that we should be able to point to, and we come back on the other side of this, bring both that and the you know, and the ability to be bold and different, bring that to bear into the new normal after this happens, and I get accused of being an eternal optimist all the time. I'll take it. I think there's a lot of good that can come out of this, and that's what I'm trying to stay focused on. When a lot of the news and the cycle tends to be negative, but Farouk, I would say on the other side of this, I see a lot more organizations being bolder about asking questions, about doing things differently, and that's higher ed and employers alike. And some of it's been out of necessity, but I think some of it is because, boy, this is something that's a long time coming, and now that we're here, let's do that. And by the way, to get there, it's going to require a lot of that, that very personal and social interaction that at that point, when we're on the other side, people are going to be craving. So I see a very, I'm rosy about it, but part of that is that's what I'm holding on to help me get through the next weeks and months.
And I would just, I'll add, I'm also an eternal optimist. So let me just pile on to what Dan was just saying. I think my number one message is that when we get out of all of this, I think we're all going to realize that we're actually one team.
Yeah.
I think too often our conversations for the past decade, both when you look at the sort of marketplace, early talent recruitment space, I think people have been like, well, I'm with universities, well, I'm technology, well, I'm an employer. And they've been these sort of like distinct silos that interact. But for those of you that are parents, especially of young children, you'll recognize the term, but it's sort of, you've been like in a constant state of parallel play. Right? So we're all like sort of playing next to each other, but not really with each other. And I think the reality is this situation has caused us to actually have to come together in ways that we haven't yet, and to actually truly see each other for the strengths and assets that each party brings to the table, so that we can build off of each other and collectively actually be stronger. And I know that sounds so idealistic, but I 100% believe that, both pre-COVID and even more post-COVID. I also think that that's apropos, quite frankly, for our entire society and country as a whole too. So I think it also applies there. I think the reality though is, Farouk, you asked the question specifically about the college experience. Will the residential experience go away? My answer would be no. I don't think it's going to go away. I think I'm a psych major, so psychology is like deeply ingrained in a lot of my thinking. But if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, that social connection is really core and key to the human experience. And it's core and key to your own development. So I think we will have greater integration with technology in ways that are more fluent and more comfortable. But I don't think the actual human interaction and sort of physical connection with like a residential experience is going to go away. I think if anything, it will be further enhanced in different ways as we move forward. And then I would just, I'll leave you with one last thing. I used to, I'm kind of strange. So I used to do this like mental exercise for myself, because I've always been, I think one of my greatest fears is being stagnant. And so I've always I always get a little nervous if I get a little too comfortable in a particular routine, like, oh my gosh, am I not stretching myself? Am I not learning something? So I used to do this mental exercise of purposely eliminating things that I was really used to, just so that it would force me into essentially what Dan was just talking about, to have to think about something differently and to have to get creative about how else I would do it, right? So within our field, thinking about, well, what if we don't have career fairs anymore? How will we still connect students and employers? What if we don't do appointments anymore? How will we still educate our students and get them information? So on and so forth. Little did we all know that we would actually be in a situation where that is somewhat the case, and it's forced us to do that. But I think it's a really helpful exercise for all of us to continue practicing doing, because I think leading and embracing change is really just a muscle. And the more you work it out, the stronger it gets, and the easier it is to actually adapt and to deal with these particularly tough and difficult times. And I think we can lean on each other as we do that. So I'll leave it there.
Don. Oh, Don, you already spoke. Yeah,
I started, so I'm just going to plus one to everyone. I don't think we want to go again.
Well, let me just jump off what Christine said. And what a great lesson. And I'm really stretching to try to find silver lining in difficult situations. And I know that it's hard for a lot of people, but also for us when in industry and in higher education, what a lesson we are getting now in being proactive rather reactive, and in being an early adopter. Because as I look around the country and our world in our industry, those of us who have been on the early adopter side and have not been afraid of jumping in with new technologies, trying new things, trying the virtual world, doing it for a long time, but moving away from traditional transactional ways of doing our work. We're, I think, experiencing this transition a lot more smoothly than others who are having to figure out all of a sudden how to use Zoom and how to use virtual tools to try to transition their business and their work in this world. So I think once this COVID-19 crisis passes, and it will pass, and all of us are agreeing about that, I think we ought to just keep exercising that muscle of constantly pushing ourselves to imagine what the future would look like, adopt new ways of doing things, be an early adopter. You know, if something hasn't been tried before, we shouldn't have to wait until it's been tried by a lot of other organizations before we do it. Why not be the pioneer? And I think that this is a really good lesson for us. So in the moment of crisis, we are really ready. So I'm hopeful that when we come out of this, personally, I mean, I don't think that we will go entirely to the world that was described in the movie. I don't know if you've seen it, Surrogates, with Bruce Willis. It's the one where everybody has a robot avatar walking around, and they're just sitting in their home in their robes and pajamas. It's really appropriate right now. So go and watch the movie again. And what you will see is that all those people look kind of like the way we look right now. We're all in our jammies all day long. Our natural hair color is starting to show.
Hey.
Except you, Dan.
That's right.
You know, so I don't think we're gonna go entirely to that world. Me personally, I'm missing the handshakes. You know, pun intended, Christine. You know, so I'm missing shaking hands with people. I was thinking about that yesterday. I was like, oh, like I you know, hugs, you know, all of these things, and I agree with the statements that I think all of us are gonna wanna, once this is over, are gonna wanna come back and just get closer to one another. Not immediately. That'll be a little bit of period of transition, but we'll get there, and the world will come back to normal. But I think with a new backdrop, we're all gonna be more comfortable with technology. We're all going to be working even more closely with the technologies that have been around us for the last 20 years. These online tools that we're using now were not created yesterday. They were around for a while. We just did not fully embrace them. And here we are now. So I think it's going to be a different world, but we're going to bring the past and the present and the future all together, and we're all going to be one community. I cannot thank you, my friends, so much for being part of the first edition of this web chat, and I'm really, really grateful. And the four of us are friends. We've known each other for a long time, and hopefully this conversation has been helpful for a lot of our viewers and attendees today. I'm really, really impressed by the response. Thank you all so much for logging in. And we do plan at Johns Hopkins to continue this, so there will be vision chats every 2 weeks for the next few months, and then when things start to normalize, we'll go back to a monthly vision chat. So be on the lookout for more.
Thank you.
With more of my friends around the country to talk about what's happening and how to react to it. Hey, I wish you all good health and safety, and enjoy this time with your loved ones and pets and families. And I hope I can't wait to give you all a hug someday soon.
Thank you for letting us be part of this. It's been a blast. Really appreciate it. It makes my day much more full. So thank you.
Very good. All right.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Take care, everyone. Thank you all so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye, Farouk.